One reason we don't teach African studies is because they would have told you about the Gullah people and Haint Blue, because I'm starting to be a little bit suspicious. So if we look at smart cities, so smart cities are 15-minute cities, are company towns. I just checked a long list for my city, and it was not on there. But a small city that has a warehouse that starts with an A and has a Z in it and is named after a South American river. Yeah, a small city in my state that has 2 of those plants is on the list. Anyway, so in 2022, I kept talking about land clearances and land grabs and such, so you can look at my predictions there. I really thought it would kick off in 22. It seems to not even quite be starting yet. It's a very, very slow burn. But anyway, the Gullah people. So with the African slave trade, and I'm not a huge fan of Out of Africa. I was an anthropology major for my undergrad, and I'm not a huge fan of Out of Africa, but I'm also not a fan of Afrocentrism or pale superiority complexes. So take everything I say with a grain of salt, do your own research, but here's what I've learned. There is a tradition of painting ceilings and or porches, this sort of almost aquamarine robin's egg blue. I almost said raven's egg blue, that's interesting. And it's supposed to ward off evil spirits and or trick them. Apparently it also works on some birds and some wasps, but it's mainly to trick evil spirits. See where I'm going with this? One thing about Out of Africa that I do believe in is that in a lot of cases of extinction events, people who live in Africa, specifically around the Great Lakes, tend to survive it. Now, the United States Great Lakes that I live nearby are the world's largest source of fresh water. The second largest, I believe, is the African Great Lakes, which are near Kenya, Rwanda, and Uganda. Now, they'll tell you that people evolved from apes in Africa and then moved out, and there were also some ancient Asians, and the most recent evolution is white people. And that is why I disagree, because it tends to paint us as a continuum from ape to white person with various branches, and I don't like that. But what I do like is that Africa tends not to glaciate, which is why a lot of those fossil records are not destroyed. This is my opinion as a person with a Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology. Yes, you can cite me on that. I do think that people are largely economically pressured off their land, whether they are Native Americans, whether they are recovering from wildfires today, whether they are people who are descendants of the Rose something, Standing Rock people, whose Black Hills Treaty was violated in 2016 by a private Canadian company, because they figured they could push toxic petroleum products through land and risk non-U.S. citizens more than U.S. citizens for a private Canadian enterprise. What? We also know, so 3/4 of my ancestors are Western European, as you can probably tell, and they were forced off their land by famine and by the Highland clearances, which was largely, basically England overstepped, and Scotland rebelled, but they mostly died of attrition. The Battle of Culloden was more just a massacre, but it was one of many. And so they had been winning a lot of battles right before then, but they ran out of supplies and people were just dying of exposure, basically, and disease. And so basically England outlasted Scotland in the Jacobite Rebellion because, and by the way, I'm a Celtic Studies minor, so I don't care about the violence porn. Anyway, actually, historically, they basically won by attrition. It's because they had better supplies. And that's why they expected to win the 13 colonies in the US. They expected to win, and they didn't. I do find that suspicious. But generally, an empire will be better supplied, and it's because they take people by force, and then they commission those people to then go get them more resources and more land. So Helveti is a Celtic death metal band that I like. I mostly like more of their melodic music, but they've got some historical references. And one of their songs that's most popular is called Thousandfold, which is basically that Celts were enslaved to go enslave other tribes. So instead of having tribal warfare, they were conquered by an enemy, an empire, and then made to go after other people. So where am I going with all this? Because I started with Haint Blue. Yes, I go on tangents, but it is all part of the same circle. Here's why. So we pay taxes voluntarily. Where is all that money going? You know, the national debt is about 22 trillion right now. You know how much the Pentagon has lost in Black Ops funding since 2016? They failed 5 audits. Why have they not had anything done? Like, if I failed an IRS audit, I'd be in prison right now. 21 trillion. That's a difference of only $1 trillion, which is a lot. Interesting. How is almost exactly how much has gone missing is what the American people owe. And then life is more expensive than we can afford to pay with our working class jobs. When people do make it, it's generally someone you know and or esoterically suspicious. Obviously, we have given up on our boomer parents, we've given up on the status quo, we've given up on religion, and the new state religion is space alien gods, which is actually a very old superiority complex about pale people. Is it exclusively? No. Has it been adopted for that purpose in the last century? Yes. That myth is probably millennia years old. I've seen the Ubaid statues. I'm 50-50 on that. It's possible that this cult of alien space gods has existed. It seems to go back to at least Atlantean mythology, so it's possibly existed for millennia, definitely centuries. So when people give up on, let's say, the Vatican or, Pentecostalism, whatever, we default to this secular religion of space gods. Okay, this is where we see the influence to invest in private prisons and camps for people from Mexico and Guatemala. Ooh, I got both political parties hating me right now. So I'm snarky at the people that socially engineer this. I don't mean to talk down to the people watching my videos, but I know I make little faces. Okay, so Haint blue repels bad spirits. But we've seen Hawaii, now we're seeing California. Those nice little city dumpster rolly cart things are real durable, aren't they, apparently? Now, I understand the difference between trees are insulators and metal is a conductor, and so some materials burn faster than others. But again, this is not the first time we've seen suspicious things. In terms of large skyscrapers, I'm 50-50 on that, although I'm, based on the personal connections I have, I weigh on the side of the government would do that. And the esoteric meaning behind towers falling, although I was a little bit wrong when the Queen of England died. I do stand by a lot of what I said. So we got blue. We have land clearances. That is politically motivated, that uses people against each other, that is funded by public funds, while a lot of Black Ops funding is going missing, that almost nearly equals, within a obviously wide margin, but a relatively very slim margin, that basically equals the American people's life debts. Let's start calling it that. I believe I got that term from Continuum, the Canadian series about a future cop. It's pretty cool. So if I prepared a paper and read it to you in podcast form, I think that might be a little bit better, which I plan to do, but I wanted to hop on here and share about Haint blue. Please feel free to go to my page and take a look. I'm going to post an image video, and then you can also Google this for yourself. But it is a pale blue that people paint the roofs, and I'm going to do more on blue pigments. This phenomenon of whether or not we can see blue, the genetic preference, Cheddar Man and various racial issues. There's a lot of symbolism about it, about blueness, but Haint blue is extremely interesting to me. So, should we start painting our porches if we live by the high-speed rail system that's proposed? Oh, I should also post that as an image map. So go ahead and go to my page. I'm going to try to find some decent music and post images of the high-speed rail system. That is probably where we're going to see these company towns. And then, because they also are where there's fires. And then Haint blue. I'm also going to post a sample of that. So it does not necessarily have to be that aquamarine type color. But I believe that the Gullah people were onto that. Do I think this has happened before? Yes. Do I think it'll happen again? Absolutely. Africa as a continent tends not to glaciate. I believe personally that that is why we find fossils there of hominids, and not because there's some timeline, because that's racist. Okay.